Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian DUTTON, and I'm the Senior SE for Gatewatcher in the UK and Ireland. So welcome to our webinar this morning. So just some housekeeping to start with. We do have a poll which we'll be asking questions as we go along during the webinar. And we also have a questions and chat section. Please, if you are asking questions, please go into the question chat and use that rather than the general chat, because myself and Zack will be monitoring the usual questions chat. Okay. So I think we're probably kind of just slightly over time. So let's start with our top three recent cyber attacks and how NDR could have avoided them. So basically, what we're going to do today is we're going to break the actual webinar into three sections. So we're going to talk about the cyber threat landscape first, then followed by network detection and response and kind of how that works and integrates into your organization and environments. And then what we'll then do is we'll take the top three attacks from last year and we'll look at those, some of the supply chain, some of ransomware, some of 0 days, and then we'll look at how basically NDR could have detected those and then avoided those and mitigated and remediated against those threats. Okay, so that's the agenda for today. Okay. If we look at the cyber threat landscape, so last year, we have our own CTI platform. So Gatewatch have Last InfoSec, which is our cyber threat intelligence platform. What we don't do as an organization, we don't anonymize customers' data and use that for our threat intelligence. Everything we do at Gatewatch resides within your environment, whether that be on-premise, in your private or public cloud. Okay, so our cyber threat intelligence platform is basically over 3,000 honeypots out there in the wild. So we're not anonymizing your data and using that. We're using all the information from those honeypots and then really collating that information. And then you can actually use Gatewatcher CTI as a standalone platform, in which case you get all of your different threat actors, you get all the different campaigns are running, what verticals you operate in, and more importantly, the IOCs attributable to those. Okay, so some of these statistics we've pulled out of Last InfoSec and others are readily available in the public domain. So looking at malware, we've seen an increase over the past year in the actual number and types and variants of malware detected. If we actually look at this, some can be 0 days or actually known days. We're seeing a lot of known days attacks. If we look at the vulnerabilities, we have nearly 30,000 published CVEs, and looking at what's happening in there in the wild, we're actually seeing that people aren't patching their systems and therefore are being vulnerable that way. And we've got kind of one of those scenarios which goes into detail in relation to that shortly. Phishing, again, that is still the number one kind of attack vector out there. And we've seen an increase of 24% over the past year. And basically what we're seeing there is there are lots of attachments in relation to PDFs. Organizations and individuals don't look at a PDF and think it's a phishing or kind of inserting malware onto their machines. But basically, people open the PDF and then they click on links within that PDF, and that's where kind of the stolen credential comes in or the malware gets installed on their machine. And so we're seeing a lot of phishing. And then if you look at as part of our cyber threat intelligence platform, we actually have an identity plugin, which basically looks at identity leaks within all organizations. So we can actually look at a particular organization and look at kind of the stolen credentials in relation to that organization. And really, we do this across the globe, and we've seen actually that .co.uk is 9% of the total identity leaks that we've seen across the globe. Okay. Then really kind of going kind of more into supply chain. We've seen a lot of supply chain attacks. Again, every organization is vulnerable. It's not your fault that you've kind of been a victim of a supply chain attack, you need to kind of ensure you have mitigation measures in place to mitigate that type of attack or risk. So there's a matter of understanding what you have on your network, what applications you're using to allow you to remediate if a supply chain attack were to occur, as well as understanding what users do and what assets you have on the network, what applications you're using. So again, we'll go into supply chain attack later and how we can kind of mitigate and remediate those, because it is kind of outside your remit. However, you need to ensure that if a third-party organization were breached, then you're not going to be breached as a result of that. And really, over the past year, financial losses, on average, you're talking about £3.3 million per data breach. And if you look at GDPR and Information Commissioner's Office, again, it's all about fines now and regulatory. If we look at DORA as well, there are lots of regulations that we need to ensure are put in place to really kind of mitigate against that financial loss and kind of cyber resiliency. So moving on, NDR, what is it? So basically, Gatewatcher are an NDR vendor, and we have a number of sensors which we can deploy within your environment. These sensors can be virtual, they can be physical, they can be in your private, they can be in your public cloud. And basically what we do is we connect via virtual taps or packet brokers, or mirror ports, spam ports, etc. And we take a copy of that traffic using kind of that sensor for kind of high throughput environments. We also have taps as well, and kind of packet brokers to steer more traffic into kind of those sensors. Then once we have that information, so we're taking the metadata, we're reconstructing the files that we see on the network, and then we send that into our NDR platform. And our NDR platform has multiple engines that we're looking for threats and then informing you and kind of providing the remediation and response around that. As I mentioned before, we have Zack our CTI platform. So we're actually taking all of the intelligence from that platform and really using that within the NDR platform as well to detect the latest and greatest threats. We have full API integration. So we'll then work with your existing tooling, whether that be the likes of IBM QRadar, Splunk, Defender for Endpoint, CrowdStrike, etc., to either enrich that information within your platforms or actually provide that automated remediation for you. So what makes the Gatewatcher solution unique? We basically have multiple different engines all using different technologies within the platform. And when I say on the platform and within the platform, we don't actually send any data out to the cloud. So we're not using any engines and pre-learning and pre-population of engines within the cloud. All of your data is kept locally, whether that be on-prem, in your public, in your private cloud. So all of these engines are actually running within the NDR platform. We have engines looking at the likes of 0 days, so shellcode, PowerShell, and we're looking at the likes of anti-malware as well. So we've got 16 anti-malware engines on books. These are doing static heuristic analysis of files. We have NBA capabilities on the box. We have ransomware as well. So basically what we're doing is we're taking all of that metadata and running it through all of these different engines to really give you that information at your fingertips, so you don't have to pivot to other systems to find out what's going on. So if you look at lateral movement and living off the land in shellcode, we've decoded that n number of times. So we might have seen that it was encoded 55 times with Bloxer. We've decoded that, and we can actually see the calls being made, so we can show the malicious intent. Likewise, living off the land with PowerShell, again, we can remove the obfuscation and look at the actual calls being made. Malware, and we can scan files that we see on the network, and we actually put those through those 16 anti-malware engines, and we're telling you whether it's malicious or whether it's benign, or whether it's potentially suspicious. So we're giving you all of that information at your fingertips, what that file is doing, the description of that file, etc. Then if we look at the likes of malware, and then we have that installed on an end user machine or maybe a server, that will beacon to a C2 server. So again, we kind of got all of those kind of phases across that entire kill chain covered. We see that beaconing out to a C2. We can detect that even if they've used an offensive framework to add jitter. Again, we can still detect that outbound communication. Then in relation to what happens when we actually see something within your environment, we will then via API calls from Reflex make an API call to your EDR agent, maybe Defender for Endpoint, maybe CrowdStrike, maybe write a rule on your firewall. So using those engines, we may detect a piece of a kind of a C2 outbound. Thereby, we can then run that through predefined playbooks within the Reflex platform, and we can block that outbound communication via making an API call to your Palo FortiGates. Or we may see that we've detected lateral movement from a particular end user machine, and we can then, again through Reflex and that automation platform, then go and make a call to Defender for Endpoint to either block that process or quarantine that host. Okay, and so that's kind of the power of having kind of all of those detection engines and kind of that response. In addition, we then have the active CTI component. And so we've taken those new IOCs, so the 0 day that we may have discovered yesterday in Singapore, we've now got an IOC match for that. And so we can push that onto the platform. We push anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 rules a day onto the platform just from CTI alone. So that allows us to detect the latest threats out there. So if there was a 0 day yesterday, we've now got an IOC match for that, and we can basically detect that within the UK and Ireland today. And that also then allows us to actually retrospectively analyze traffic that has been within your environment over the past couple of weeks or couple of months. Then we basically have all of the different CTI feeds coming in, so we can look at the brand protection, the stolen credentials, etc., and really give you an external exposure type function. Okay. Then moving on, I did mention that we have all of the engines within the platform, so we can actually operate in a fully air-gapped environment. So for some customers, they find this really useful, low bandwidth links and high latency links. Again, we can fit into the kind of those types of environments. So if we take the cyber kill chain and we look at a real attack and the actual steps taken with that kind of attacker, basically they'll do a passive recon looking for misconfiguration. Once they've found that, an example may be that they then do a brute force and try and log into a system. Okay, we've now been compromised. That attacker is now within our system. Once they get into the organization, they're going to do a port scan, a network scan to see what devices, what IP addresses, what applications, what networks you have within your infrastructure. And from there, they understand what applications you have, what operating systems you have, and therefore what vulnerabilities you have within your environment. They will then exploit those vulnerabilities. If they're laterally moving, they may use PowerShell, they may use shellcode. Then once they've laterally moved, they will open outbound connections to those C2 and then await further instructions. Following that, they'll laterally move further across the network and basically do their action on objectives, which means either exfiltrate data so that they can prove that they have your data, and then basically encrypt all your systems and kind of be subjected to ransomware attacks. Or maybe they may just keep a backdoor in and just steal your intellectual property. Okay, so if you look at that entire kill chain, where the detection engines come in from Gatewatcher are that we'll see all of those differences and those patterns of tactics and techniques that an attacker uses across the entire kill chain. We will see the passive recon, the Nmap scans. We'll see users trying to be brute forced. We've got the SigFlow engines, which are static rules-based engines. We've got network behavior analytics, so we can see if somebody's trying to do a scan of LDAP. We then can see kind of any internal reconnaissance and map scans, etc. If attacker is then trying to laterally move, again, we're detecting the shell code. We're looking at PowerShell, we're removing that, we're looking at all the commands and the communications that are occurring across the network. And then once they've dropped their piece of malware or kind of outbound C2, again, we can detect those beacons, we can look at domain generation algorithms, and we can actively hunt and kind of detect that. We can see the exfiltration again, and at all of these steps, we can then automatically block this via reflex and doing kind of that automation. So we've got that entire kill chain, we've got all the different tactics and techniques, and we've detected all of those, and we can really stitch everything together and really track back to kind of patient zero, where it all started off, and kind of how much data has been leaked, and kind of the issues in relation to kind of what that attacker has done within the system. So now that you have a quick introduction to network detection response and what we do in relation to kind of all those different engines across that entire kill chain, what I wanted to do now was look at 3 scenarios. And we've really taken these from the cyber threat landscape, looking at kind of what attacks were popular. We've got the Move It attack, we've got the 3CX attack, and we've got the VMware attack. And each of these is slightly different. We have a 0-day, we have a known day, we have a supply chain attack. And what we're going to do is we're going to look in detail at each of these attacks, and then how NDR would have detected those and responded and mitigated those attacks. So let's look at the Move It attack. Move It, for those who don't know, is a file transfer server application. And basically, it's used by lots of organizations out there. We look at this particular attack, it actually affected approximately 85 million individuals. Okay. What happened? Okay, there was a 0-day. Okay, so a 0-day got discovered, and then that 0-day was then exploited using because of the vulnerabilities. And following that, once they exploited the vulnerability, a web shell was dropped, data is then exfiltrated, and once the data has been exfiltrated, we can then basically prove to you that we have your data and that either you pay or we're going to start encrypting your data. Okay. So basically, how would we have detected this? Okay, bearing in mind it's a 0-day. Okay. If you look at network detection and response is completely agentless. Okay. We are monitoring north-south traffic, east-west traffic. We're looking at network behavior. Okay. So in doing all of that and analyzing all of the actual data on the network, we can then identify particular threats within that traffic. So we can identify a 0-day by looking at encoded shellcode or obfuscated PowerShell, removing that, looking at the core, so we can actually see that lateral movement. If we look at taking the vulnerabilities that we have within the network, if we're then using our CTI platform, so we're taking those new IOC feeds and looking at what we have within the network and seeing if we've got matches on that. Okay, so we can detect those weaknesses in real time. And then once that attacker has landed, and they will initiate that outbound connection. So they'll set up that outbound connection to a C2. Again, we're going to detect that with the C2 beaconing, and we're going to detect an encrypted tunnel. We're going to detect data exfiltration because we've got visibility across that entire kill chain. Okay. And so that's how Gatewatcher would have detected the actual MOVEit attack. And basically from there, we could have then done an API call to a firewall to actually block that outbound connection. The second one is a supply chain attack. So this is a double supply chain attack. Basically, 3CX is a VoIP system. And basically what happened is an X-Trader the X-Trader application got compromised. A 3CX employee downloaded X-Trader, and then before you know it, they've then got access into that environment. They've then laterally moved through that environment. They've got to the development, so the continuous improvement, continuous development lifecycle, and they've implanted themselves into that build environment. And then your 3CX user is then compromised because they've downloaded that particular update. Okay. How do you go about protecting this? Because you as an organization cannot stop that 3CX employee from downloading X-Trader. Okay. However, what we can do is we can monitor the environment to see what's happening within your data center, your public cloud, your private cloud, to see if there's unusual activity there. And so the first thing we're going to look at is, because we're an NDR, we're taking all of the network traffic, we will discover all of your assets within your organization. We'll discover all of your applications that are being used within your organization. We can see if people are using particular applications that are sanctioned or unsanctioned. We can detect that shadow IT. We can look at both IT and OT, and we can map those whole communications out. Then with that, we can then detect vulnerabilities, and we can look for lateral movement. And again, we can use the ingestion from the CTI platform to look at those kind of latest threats. And if we knew that 3CX had been compromised, again, we can look for particular IOCs within the environment. Okay. And again, even if you didn't know that 3CX had been compromised, we're still looking at C2 connections, encrypted tunneling. We're looking at network behavior. So again, we would have still found that attack. And again, we could have used Reflex to kind of automated that remediation. And then finally, let's talk about the VMware attack. So again, if we look back to the threat landscape, we saw that there was nearly 30,000 different CVEs out there. The problem we have is most organizations are stretched and they don't patch all the systems. If you look at the ESXi attack, that was a known day. They released a patch for it back in 2021. However, it was only being exploited in the wild in 2023. And so it's over 4 years old. Okay. So how do we go about detecting these known vulnerabilities? Well, the best way of protecting yourself against these is to patch your system. However, some people don't understand all of the different applications they have within their infrastructure. Some may be legacy applications, some may be unsupported, but still a core part of their corporate network. Okay. So again, if we look at what the ESI attack did, it was a known vulnerability. They then brought an exploit out, and then it's all about kind of ransomware being dropped and data exfiltrated, and then ransom notes being published. If we look at kind of where we can detect that, again, it was a known vulnerability. We can detect that within the platform straight away if it's a known vulnerability. We can then have a match against the IOCs that we're seeing for that particular exploit from the CTI feed. We're looking at lateral movement across the network as well, and they're dropping packages on to then start encrypting traffic. They're doing the exfiltration of that data. And with kind of ransomware, they're then encrypting your data, and they're doing lots of different SMB calls, read writes to encrypt that data. Again, we'll detect that with all of the different engines that we have within the platform. And again, we can go to remediate that. So really, in summary, we're basically trying to minimize the impact of an attack by controlling the threat exposure and looking at the threats within the environment. We're not baselining, we're not doing anomalies, we're looking for threats within your environment. And we do that by maximizing the visibility that we have within your environment. So we've got those sensors, we're taking all the data in across all of your environments, we're looking at the applications, the assets, whether they be IT, whether they be OT devices, and we're putting those detection capabilities in using those different engines with all of those different technologies, and then allowing you to remediate that either manually through your existing SOAR and toolset, or automatically through Reflex. So thank you very much. If you do have any further questions following on from today's webinar, please get in touch with me at ian.dutton@gatewatcher.com, and then we'll just quickly go to the question section now to see if we've had any questions. Okay, it doesn't appear that we have any questions, so okay, thank you very much. So have a nice day, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.